Motion by Mark.
Support.
Support by Elena. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the general public comment. This provision is made to encourage the expression of questions and concerns regarding non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. Speakers are asked to identify themselves by name and address. A maximum time of 5 minutes per person is requested. If you have something you would like to address the Planning Commission on that is not on the agenda this evening, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, I have one announcement or a general comment about technological issues. There's a new audio-visual system online now, so I think this is the first meeting the Planning Commission has had with these new microphones. Just a quick tutorial for you folks and the people in the audience. Before you speak, just be sure to press the wide button in the center of these consoles. You'll be looking for the red light to go on, and that means you'll know you'll be tied into the YouTube and the audio and the video that's recorded tonight. Up to 4 of these can be on at once, so that means the chair and then up to 3 other planning commissioners. If folks are making public comments tonight, just be sure to push the button in the center of the microphone before you speak.
Okay, thank you.
So we have to press the button before we say anything.
That's correct. If you want it to be heard.
No public comment? Then we will move on. Next item on the agenda is case 18-823, CrossFit 616 LLC, 2430 Turner Avenue Northwest, special exception use permit public hearing. Applicant 616 Fit LLC has applied on behalf of owner DBV Inc., seeking a special exception use permit and site plan review to use the majority of the roughly 16,000 square foot industrial building as a fitness center with unrelated or related accessory improvements, including off-street parking. The subject lot is located at 2430 Turner Avenue Northwest. Dan?
Okay, thanks, Tyler. This, it's a long title, but it's a fairly simple review in comparison with the other projects we'll be looking at tonight. So I'll try to run through my slides quickly and then for the applicant an opportunity to speak about their business and make an informed decision based on that. So a little bit of context first. Here we are in the Turner area. There's some various industrial businesses on the east side of the railroad and on the east side of 131 there. You have a number of things like machine shops and the Deltaplex, but this is a tenant space that is being occupied and proposed to be continually occupied by CrossFit Fitness Club, and I'll get into more of the history of how that came to be in a couple of slides here. For a little bit more context, the zoning district that we're looking at on which this lot sits is heavy industrial. Uses permitted by special exception include fitness centers and health clubs, and that was true as of the beginning of 2018 when the Planning Commission recommended, and then the City Commission adopted the recommendation for certain recreational and fitness type uses as special exception uses in the industrial district, even though they're not really industrial in nature. This was on the heels of having things like gymnastic centers, paintball, various types of recreation proposed in large industrial spaces that really make sense for that type of use, but don't otherwise fit with industrial traffic flows and industrial use as employment base and things that we usually look at for industrial sites. So the idea being that these sites can fit within the broader industrial fabric if we go through some findings to say that basically we're compatible with the adjacent land uses, that there won't be a detriment to those land uses, and that the adjacent land uses can continue to grow in an orderly manner. So a little bit of land use history on this building. The building, I don't have the square footage on here, but it's a little over 10,000 square feet. The building was constructed in 1990. There was a business license granted for this use in 2014, and that's a little bit of a record-keeping issue that we've been looking into, and at this point what we're finding is that the next 2 points down on the slide, you're seeing that there's a sign permit application for this business, and at that point I said, well, I did know this was here, and I wanted to make sure I was tracking the land use history, because as we know from last year, we assigned special use permits to fitness centers of that nature, and I realized this had not gone to Planning Commission for review. So there seems to have been a gap in the review history, but now here we are with the use being proposed to continue, and basically I'm saying let's make sure we get this formally reviewed and approved, or considered, formally reviewed and considered, and either tabled, approved, or denied before we consider the sign permit application. So that's kind of the untangling of this land use history and review history on this site. But as we know, these uses are permitted by special use permit now, so that's the framework in which we're looking at allowing it to continue. So, and I mentioned the building overall is a little over 10,000 square feet, maybe closer to 12. There's one other tenant space that's a few thousand square feet, but this space occupies about 9,000 square feet. Some operational details: they have up to 30 people allowed in their classes. They're open basically 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays, except for Friday. They're open until 7. So kind of the same hours of operation as your first and second shift, overlapping in the adjacent industrial areas. But the idea being that these are more kind of regular hour-based blocks of classes and not peak flows of traffic to the sites, which might help to kind of disperse the traffic and disperse the use between the hours of operation. Also open for a few hours on Saturdays. So when I'm looking at this, I see that there's a fairly even distribution of classes. The classes are in 1 hour segments within those time frames, not peak traffic flows to the site. So when you're looking at the special use standards, the first thing you look for is compatibility with the, or the second thing, the first thing was what I just talked about with operational standards, compatible with the intent of the heavy industrial zone district. So does this use allow the enjoyment of adjacent sites and the ability for manufacturing, regulated and organized manufacturing, to continue to grow and uses as a job center adjacent to the site? You look at allowing the adequate provision of utilities and services and access to the site. And that's kind of boiling down a number of special use criteria in one slide. Here's the site plan that was originally turned in. I think this is actually a soil erosion plan, but it's the illustrative version of the plan that they submitted with their proposal. The highlighted area shows you, and I stand corrected, it's about 16,000 square feet, the overall building size. The highlighted area shows about the area that the CrossFit occupies. Here's what the site looks like. You see not a lot of cars parked. This was a mid-afternoon on a weekday. Based on what we know about how this use operates, and I'll ask the applicant/business owner to give a little bit more detail about what they do there and what their programming is like. But based on what I know about the site and some of the factors that I reviewed in the last few slides, I would recommend conditionally approving the allowance of continuing this use. I would recommend that you approve based on the narrative letter that came in with your application. That letter is the basis for the hours of operation that were identified and the class size limits that were identified. So the idea being that if these folks move out and there's another more intensive fitness club type use, or a more intensive, think more along the lines of indoor arena or more intensive recreation, that would have to come through as a different special exception use through the Planning Commission, so that we have reasonable limits on this use's ability to continue to operate. And that if there are any parking spaces that need to be restriped, as you might have seen in the last slide, the parking lot is in decent shape, but you want to make sure that having regular classes in that area, you have barrier-free parking spaces still striped and very clearly visible parking spaces provided throughout the life of this business. So those are my two main conditions that I would recommend approving, based on restriping of parking areas to be checked in about a year, and class sizes not exceeding 30 people.
Any questions for Dan? Sorry. Any questions for Dan? Otherwise, the applicant can approach and please state your name for the record.
Brian Oropalo.
Did you have anything you wanted to present or just take questions?
No,
or?
I mean, I've been talking with Dan quite a bit about this. I told him when we first started and we filed the sign permit that when we moved in 2014 and filed the license, we thought we were doing everything correctly, and it wasn't we weren't trying to slip by anybody or anything. We just thought we had done what we needed to do, so we just wanted to be upfront, and we presented all that information to him. I think he said that the cap on our class size is 30 people. On average, it's more like a 15-person class. Maybe on a Saturday morning we'll have 30 when no one else is open around us anyway. But we kind of keep to ourselves in that space, and we actually work with our tenant or the other tenant in that building. They print T-shirts for us, and we have a good relationship with them. So the parking lot was restriped last year. Was that right? Yeah, last year. I don't know if when those pictures were taken or whatever. I don't think there's barrier-free parking, which I've already spoke with Visser about getting that added in, and whatever, we want to cooperate the best we can. So whatever questions you have for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions?
I just have one. Do any of the employees of any of the other facilities close to you use your facility as a workout?
We have had people come in, even some of the truck drivers have driven by and stopped and asked us, come in for a little while. We haven't had any long-term commitments yet, but we do feel like we have a good relationship with those people that they pop in.
Anybody else? Okay, you can have a seat. We'll open the public hearing. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
Make that motion.
Motion by Steve and support.
Support.
Support by Elena. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The public hearing is open. If you would like to address this case, please approach, and concerns about this case, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion.
A motion by Elena. Support.
Support.
Support by Steve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed. So, what's your pleasure?
Just a couple things to note about your motion as you make your decision. Every special use permit is associated to a site plan. In this case, I thought it was appropriate just to use the original site plan for the site because there's no additional engineering work proposed. So there are two separate motions, and there's also a revised motion sheet I put on your spot tonight. So use the whoever's making that motion, if you could use that revised motion sheet. Thanks.
Seems pretty non-problematic, and so I'm happy to make a motion if we're ready.
We're ready.
All right.
I have just one question for Dan. You mentioned, approving this within the guidelines of the narrative that they wrote. Is that in the motion somewhere that's part of the approval?
Right. I think the most pertinent guideline that they committed to within their write-up was the 30-person class size limit. I think the hours of operation, I don't know if they're necessarily as important to enforce based on. If you have a class in the middle of the night, it wouldn't be a big deal for the adjacent uses to continue to do what they're doing. So I think the most important thing from their narrative was the 30-person class size, and that is in the motion.
Sounds good. So for case 18-823, I'll make a motion to approve the special exception use permit submittal by DBV Inc., including the survey site plan dated 10/12/1994 for the 616 CrossFit project at 2430 Turner Avenue Northwest. Findings of fact for special exception use permit approval. The establishment, maintenance, location, or operation of the CrossFit Fitness Center / small group and personal training gym use. The use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public. The use is compatible with the intent of the zoning district and will not change the essential character of the surrounding area. The continuation of a fitness center at this site will not result in significant adverse impact on the natural environment. The continuation of this use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property for uses permitted in that district because it's generally complementary in terms of operation hours and nature of the business, I would think. Is that adequate for that? Adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and other necessary services or facilities are provided such that the use will not place demands on public services or facilities in excess of capacity, and the continuation of the use will conform to the Walker zoning ordinance and other applicable local, state, and federal laws. Conditions of special exception use permit approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's report dated 1/8/2019. Additional condition, the applicant agrees to limit class sizes to 30 people. And that is the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Terry. Questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, for case 18-823, I will make a motion to approve the site plan submittal by DBV Inc., including the survey/site plan dated 10/12/1994 for the 616 CrossFit project at 2430 Turner Avenue Northwest.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Elena. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's done. Moving on, case number 18-822, 4 Mile Apartment Project, rezoning and preliminary site plan public hearing. Applicant and owner Steve Visser, Builder, LLC, has applied for rezoning and a preliminary area site plan review for multifamily residential project to be titled 4 Mile Apartments. The subject lot is located at 1146 4 Mile Road Northwest, is zoned ORP, Office Research and Parking, and is assessed as residential improved. The lot is roughly 1.6 acres in area. The proposal involves a request to rezone the lot to RPUD2, high-density residential, planned unit development, and a request for approval of preliminary site plan, which would include 12 residential units in 2,275 square foot building, parking, and related site improvements. Dan?
Thanks, Tyler. I think most of the folks in the audience, except for the patient people waiting for the I-6 project, are here for this review. I will try to keep my comments as concise as possible, but there is a fair amount to go through because this is both rezoning and looking at a preliminary area site plan. So we want to be careful to review the rezoning request fully based on the rezoning checklist. So I'll go through that checklist and also give you some context on the site. So here is the aerial image of the site. I bet most people in the room are pretty well aware of this scene. This is the English Ridge and English Hills condos are to the south of the site. You're looking at what is I believe, public street in Alpine Township, Cordis Avenue to the north, English Hills Drive, private street to the south. So this is the large, multiple 100-acre English Hills golf course site to the south-southwest. With the condos adjacent, and then if you zoom farther out, and I don't have a good aerial image of this, but I'll show you some other pictures later, you have the very intensively developed Alpine Avenue and 4 Mile intersection with commercial, and then the higher density apartment project, the Orchards, near that intersection as well. So there's a lot to consider here. It's a transitional area with a lot of adjacent land use to consider, and I didn't even mention adjacent to the east and across the street to the north and northwest, you have single-family residential as well as even some more agricultural land use. That being said, I'll get into future land use too, but there is a sanitary and water service district that extends into Alpine Township a little farther away. So when I say agricultural, we're not talking about necessarily agricultural preservation as best I understand it, but it is pretty low density immediately near this site in Alpine Township. Here's a kind of rough picture of the site looking west on 4 Mile Road. You can see some traffic coming at you from the signalized intersection of Cordis / English Hills Drive and 4 Mile. Here's a couple of pictures more from the vantage point of within the English Hills condos, or actually English Ridge condos, aiming north on that top image and aiming sort of toward the woods and wetlands that are on the back end of this project site and also shared with the adjacent condo site, looking east there on the bottom image. So we're talking about a rezoning tonight. So the zoning is not in place for any sort of residential use right now. The zoning is actually in place for what's called office research and parking. My understanding is back in 2006 there was a conceptual proposal for marketing this site for office uses. I don't have the exact square footage off the top of my head, but it was a office building that had a footprint not too different from what's being proposed here. And that never came to pass because I think we all know what happened soon after 2006. There was a prolonged period of recession, and I think that project did not get built. I'm not sure if that's directly related, but in any event, the rezoning was set up. Nothing was ever built there pursuant to office zoning. So I have a note in there about trip generation rates that I'll get to a little bit later, but I do have the minutes from that rezoning case in the Planning Commission's digital packet online. I can share that information later as well. So the zoning is for office research and parking uses, and that includes a variety of medical, dental office uses, conventional office spaces, as well as a variety of other things that are listed in the zoning ordinance. The site has remarkable topography. There's a pretty steep drop in the south end of the site, and that's where you see those lines on this map squished closer together. That's where you have more fall on the site. So there's some wetlands and some steep drop in the rear of the site. And you can see a sanitary easement crossing the condo property, water main, sanitary sewer. Tying water to this project is part of the proposal. Water and sewer is part of the proposal as well. On this image, you can see what is sort of a draft picture of wetland inventory from the Michigan DEQ's website. The applicant will be expected to do a full wetland survey to kind of verify the locations of the wetlands in the rear of the site. If this project moves forward, at least that would be my recommendation. But this gives you a general idea of where it's wet and where it's low and where you have wetland plants basically growing on the site. To give a little bit more context here, you have a conceptual site plan, kind of a preliminary area site plan that we require as part of this application. But to give you a little bit more context, I thought it would be perhaps helpful to kind of rubber stamp the design of the site on an aerial drawing. This shows you the relation to adjacent home sites and condo sites. So you're looking at the limits of their grading. So you can see there is some preserved trees shown near the south end of the property, I think about a half an acre. Preserved wetlands, and then otherwise the building footprint is on the north end of the site. And here's what it actually looks like as proposed. So this gives a little bit more of the layout detail. Two buildings with about a little under 3,000 square foot footprint. They're both 3 stories. Got that right? 2.5 stories. So there's a walkout and a second story. So the actual floor area is quite a bit more than the roughly 2,300 square feet. It's closer to 11,800 if you talk about all the unit floor areas. There's also sidewalk proposed along 4 Mile, 26 parking spaces, stormwater, and then of course connection to public utilities in terms of water and sanitary service. Minor landscaping along 4 Mile, just a couple of trees are shown there. We don't require landscaping under this zoning, under a specific type of landscape plan, but all PUD projects in this form of zoning should have some form of a landscaping plan layout associated with them. And you can note there is tree preservation on the south end of the site as well, in the form of about a half acre preserved. So here's the architecture of the buildings. I'll let the applicant speak more about the materials that are used, and I'm sure we'll get more of a material schedule firmed up, although there was a floor plan and architectural drawing submitted in PDF form with the application. But what you're looking at is 12 units in each of these buildings, and that equates to, of course, about 7.4 units per acre, which is consistent, I say here, with high-density residential land use thresholds, and that's a bit of a mistype because it's also consistent with medium density, which is what the master plan actually calls for. It's pushing the limits of what we'd call medium density, but medium density in Walker's 1998 master plan designation is up to 8 units per acre. As you'll see in some following slides, that's higher than the density of some adjacent project sites. So just something to consider. We're kind of pushing the upper threshold of that medium density designation. As they show on their floor plans now, each unit is proposed as a 2-bedroom, and they'll meet the minimum floor area requirements for those types of units under our zoning ordinance. Here's the elevation, so you can get a better sense of the height. The average height is about 27 feet, give or take, based on the way we measure that. So what's your role? The Planning Commission's role tonight is to take 2 actions in their motion. There's a recommendation for rezoning for the RPUD 2 zoning category, and a recommendation to review and consider the preliminary area site plan for the project. Pending a potential approval, that would then go to our city commission. So this is not the last stop before the site is rezoned and the project continues. There's also a city commission consideration of the zoning, and that's attached to that plan that we just looked at. If that goes through, then there would be and I call this a future request, but it's presumably a upcoming application with a little bit more detail. It's going to be what's called a final area site plan with more detail for the apartment site. Consistency with other area zoning and land uses. That's one of the things you're going to look for with your rezoning. I'm going to jump right into the rezoning checklist. So with area zoning, you do see similar zoning nearby. I highlighted that the site to the southwest is the old English Hills proposal. That is zoned RPUD 2 based on a land use plan that was approved in 2005, 2006. Adjacent to the south in the condos, you have more lower density planned unit development. And then you have a mix of other zoning types. You have the ORP office, research and parking, and then you have the ARM multifamily closer to Alpine. So there's a variety of zoning in this area. You do have a lot of activity on Alpine Avenue where higher density residential zoning has been considered appropriate in past years. And so that's kind of a picture of the adjacent zoning. I have kind of a lot of notes on this slide about density. I'm going to give some disclaimers here, and I did have a resident from the condominiums adjacent at 1143 English Ridge Drive give me some updated facts to look at, and so the numbers might need to be tweaked a little bit, but I'm going to just tell you what was proposed as part of the approved plans for these projects adjacent. The English Ridge condos had been approved for up to 42 units. I know that's not what's actually built there now, on about 10.5 acres. The English Hills condos were about 12 units on, I pulled that number from the subject site, so that's actually incorrect, but the orange is actually referring to the subject project site, but the English Hills expired project is about 4.5 units per acre with 638 units on 144 acres, and the Orchards is about 663 units on 29 acres. I understand the numbers that actually were built are a little bit different. The acreage might be a little bit off, but that's roughly, you're looking at the adjacent condominium projects somewhere around that 4 unit per acre threshold that you'd see more with kind of the upper reaches of low density and the lower reaches of medium density, as opposed to this project, you're looking at more the upper reaches of medium density. Consistency with area development trends. You can see what's planned in the area. I just wanted to show a simple slide that kind of depicts what the future land use plan in the affected communities shows here. Walker, you're looking at a approved area subplan for master plan commercial and a mix of other uses kind of on the Old English Hills site. And that's something that we'll take a closer look at as we continue to revise and evolve our sub-area planning. And we will be looking at the English Hills site if and when a development proposal comes in there someday. On the north side of the line, you have low-density residential continue to be planned in Alpine Township. So 4 Mile Road, of course, is the divider. You want to edge match as much as possible. But if the density in the area of this project grows out as planned, you would be looking at that medium-density residential kind of on this site and adjacent to it, approaching toward Alpine Avenue. Another thing to look at with consistency with development trends, one thing to keep in mind is that we have precisely platted a road to connect from that intersection of Cordis and 4 Mile Road over to Bristol. So you'd have a planned transportation improvement in the works if there's what we'd consider more of a comprehensive redevelopment project for that English Hills site. And that's something we'll continue to look at, but this is something that's in our code as being required with redevelopment at a large scale in this area. So just something to keep in mind, that if this area continues to grow significantly, we will continue to plan for redundancy in the road network and connecting the grid so that there's roads that connect 4 Mile and disperse some of the traffic out to Bristol. That's something that's been in the works since this was written up in 2008, 2009, and we'll continue to look at if there's a redevelopment project in the area that's larger scale than this one. Consistency with the master plan, I've already kind of gone over the fact that this is kind of the upper threshold of what I think the 1998 master plan was indicating. You have medium density residential being up to 8 dwelling units per acre. So when you're just looking at the numbers, that is what you're looking at on this site. The specific examples in that plan are some of the older platted subdivisions where you have smaller, maybe 1/8 acre lots, thinking more along the lines of some of the Chesterfield Heights lots, some single story condos and apartment projects, manufactured home communities. And here's some key points: transition points between commercial or industrial uses and lower density residential, access to transit, availability of open spaces, safe streets, and access to what they call small scale shopping. Those points I think are important in this case, because if you're looking at areas in Walker where a little bit higher density is probably reasonable, I think you'd be really focusing in on an area like the Alpine Corridor and Standale, where you have access to things like transit and you have a synergy of many different use types in one area. That being said, when you're talking about density, you're also talking about numbers of people taking trips in cars, and I'm sure that's a concern among some of the residents in the audience tonight. But you do have to keep in mind that from a broad planning perspective, the higher density is probably appropriate in places where you're transitioning in a busy commercial area. Consistency with the master plan, again, here's a picture from the 2006, what we call the Sub-Area 3B future land use plan. That was really a focused effort in mapping out how the Planning Commission wanted to see the English Hills site and the adjacent land redeveloped. Note that they did not specifically hone in on this site or revisit or reassign a future land use value to this site. So this remained at that medium density residential that you see here, but I'm just showing you what's planned adjacent to the site. When you're looking at public health, safety, and welfare aspects of rezoning, I think it's important to point out traffic and just to sort of compare what's there now to what could be. I think you look at a number of somewhere around 7 trips per day per unit for a multifamily housing development. So with 77 trips per day, you'd have about 94 trips from the site, give or take. There's definitely wiggle room in there depending on how the development actually shakes out. But with office, you're looking at somewhere closer to, I think it's 11 trips per, I think that's supposed to be 1,000 square feet. And so, pretty close if you're looking at an office building with two 5,000 square foot floor areas. You'd have maybe about 100 trips per day, give or take. I won't get into the weeds on some of those other trip generation numbers, but that gives you a rough idea of what you'd be comparing with the existing zoning in place if it was built out in full, with sort of lower impact offices, maybe generating less traffic, and something like a medical or dental office generating probably more traffic at the peak hour than residential units would. When you're looking at the traffic issue, and the slide I mentioned a few slides ago with the planned road connecting from 4 Mile to Bristol, one of the obvious things you think about is access management and making sure the road network is designed well with redundancy so that you're not cramming a lot of traffic onto the high impact corridors. So one of the first things we looked at staff level was, can we tie this in to that road that's going to be precisely platted so that you can get out to the signalized intersection, you're not putting a new driveway on 4 Mile with more units dumping traffic out to there. It is limiting from an environmental standpoint with the fact that there's a lot of grade that you'd have to move around to make that happen, but also from a legal standpoint, the fact remains that for now, English Hills Drive is a private street. So you can't force the access on English Hills Drive, at least until there's a precise plat in place and a public road in place to allow that traffic flow to enter onto there. So certainly something we looked at. One other point of this is that even if you did get to English Hills Drive, this is a shallow enough lot that you don't have a lot of separation from the traffic light, which could also cause some stacking issues. So certainly something to consider, something to talk through, but I think you can say that staff accepts the recommendation not to include that connection in this plan. So in my opinion, based on a lot of different factors that warrant a lot of consideration by the Planning Commission, there's points to be discussed for sure, but I think that based on kind of a straight read of the master plan and with a well-designed site, this proposal could be conditionally approved in terms of being recommended for rezoning to the City Commission and the preliminary area site plan being approved. I don't tack a lot of conditions on at this point other than to ask you to consider this more deeply and hear from the residents nearby and from the applicants because the kind of nitty-gritty zoning details flesh out in what the second step of review, what's called the final area site plan. So I won't be getting into dimensions of parking spaces at this point or caliper of trees, some of the stuff you see in my longer lists and some other projects. So I would just tack on a few conditions there that you heed the city engineer's recommendations, that you require that the existing structure on that site be demolished, and that there's a full formal final area site plan review process before this gets approved by the Planning Commission, pending a rezoning approval from the City Commission. So thanks. I know that was a little drawn out, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak through the project.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan initially? Scott?
I'll try to go a little quicker. I think Dan covered some ground for me, so that should help. As he noted, initially we wanted to see a driveway off the south leg of that intersection. I think that goes all the way back to 2006 when we looked at that site initially. Back then it was probably a good idea. I think the site was going to be developed in a little bit of a different way. As we've lost hair, we've gained wisdom, and here we are in 2019 agreeing that I think the driveway to the east is probably going to be the best fit for this site with this type of development. And they have gotten that approved from the Kent County Road Commission, so we're in pretty good shape there. Another big item for this site is the need for sanitary sewer, and the developer has done a good bit of legwork already and confirmed that it's feasible. So I think all we need to do at this point is continue to let them work, but to be advised that we shouldn't be issuing any kind of building permits out there until that is a done deal, completely done. Because if something happens and, for example, an easement can't be obtained for the sewer on the English Hills property, that stops the whole project, and you really can't put any kind of building in there without that, so that's important. There's a picture there that goes along with item number 3 that talks about a drainage easement, and you can see there's a note that talks about 120 feet of proposed 12-inch storm, which is a good idea from a drainage standpoint, but they would have to get an easement for that as well, and that's not shown on the plan. I think It might be, as a designer, you might look at this and just kind of assume in your head that it's public right of way because it's intended to be someday, but it's not today. So in order to do that today, they'd have to get an easement. And we traded a few emails earlier today, and I think the hope would be they could find another solution where they don't need that easement, but they have to work around the new sanitary sewer, so it's a little challenge there. Probably more of a final area site plan comment. The west side of their parking lot, they need to capture that water, preferably in a catch basin, and get that down to the storm sewer. You know, we talk about it a lot at the Planning Commission that we don't want to have water spilling off of paved areas. The ordinance doesn't allow it. What we do allow is if somebody's got a low impact development technique, something kind of innovative that they want to try, we usually try to give them some flexibility. Here it's so close to the storm sewer and the drainage, it's just best to collect it. And then that also helps because with a catch basin, you've got a sump in the bottom of that basin to catch all the bad stuff. Lots of the grits and the grimes and the brake shavings and things like that. And then finally, they would need detention calculations to confirm that they can put the water into the pond for the condominiums to the south. And again, we can work that out during the final area site plan. That's it.
Questions for Scott?
Scott, so in Grand Rapids has taken a look at that, and at least they have indicated to your department that there's capacity and it's feasible to make a connection there?
Just like the Discovery Channel there where they throw it on the plaque that says feasible or plausible. Yeah, it looks like they can do it.
Okay, all right. And if they didn't get the storm sewer easement along where it's portrayed on here, do they have room within their site to accomplish that?
It would be a little bit challenging, but I'm sure they can work that out. With the slopes to the south, you know, they could pull those back, put in retaining walls, do some different things to make that fit. I think Randy just needs to spend a little bit more time with it.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, if the applicant would like to make a statement, take questions. Please state your name for the record.
Randy Feenstra, I'm the engineer and surveyor. Steve Visser and Brandon Visser are here also. Dan and Scott pretty much covered it. I just want to address a couple things. One is density. It is higher than the English Ridge to the south, but there is a little difference in that it is right on 4 Mile. English Ridge is back in behind, and 4 Mile is a very busy road, and you would think that it would be more appropriate for a higher density. I did talk to the road commission. They said if you put the driveway as far over from Cordis or English Hills Drive as you can, it's appropriate. I sent them the plan, and they basically approved that. It says, yeah, you've got it where it's got to be. We do have an easement already for the sanitary sewer. I've got it signed by the English Hills people, Kim Sorrell. The storm easement, there is a valley going down. It's in the woods, but it's taken the storm sewer from a public storm that's coming in off of the Cordis 4 Mile intersection and dropping into a little ditch that goes down into the wetland area. So it's already taken public water. There's no easement on it now. I proposed the storm sewer just because there's some pretty bad erosion in that ditch going down to the bottom. So I thought it'd be better to put a catch basin, put it in a pipe, and clean the whole area up. If necessary, we don't have to pick it up. I can put in a catch basin at the end of that parking lot and run that pipe straight down into the wetlands, or, you know, in the bottom of that area, and just leave the ravine there and let it erode continually. And I thought that's not a good way to do it. Let's clean it up. Yeah, the west parking lot catch basin that Scott referred to, I think that's something that we could look at as part of the final area site plan. And the detention, I just haven't had a chance to go and look at what the volumes for the English Hills detention pond is. That easement does go onto the property. We can tie into it, but I haven't looked at the volumes. So I'm only going from memory, but I believe there was extra capacity in it when we designed it. So, any other questions?
Okay.
One other thing, I did want Brandon to come up. If you could bring that slide up that shows the picture of from the architect. Maybe he can talk about finishes a little bit on the buildings.
Sure, thanks Randy. I'm Brandon Visser. I'm kind of more in the realm of the construction aspect of it, so I've kind of toyed around with the design and kind of honed it in to be something that's functional and appealing to the surrounding area. So as you can tell, it kind of has the glimmer of just a residential construction. That's what we're kind of our bread and butter. We build houses and condominiums. So this is kind of in that realm. Vinyl siding, asphalt shingles, stone veneer on the front, below windows. This isn't necessarily locked in by any means, but we're open to suggestions. This is kind of just what we thought that went with the times, and kind of just brought a little more curb appeal to that corner. I know right now it's kind of a dismal corner with brush overgrowing, and we thought this was just a great way to kind of clean up that little corridor. Parking lot and trees, everything would be landscaped pretty much like a typical subdivision residential single-family home kind of scenario with bushes, shrubs, trees up by the road. Are there any more in-depth details about materials or design?
Any questions about that? I guess not.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, can you come back up? I'm sure there's going to be some questions here. Thank you, Brandon. What is the rent scope? Well, how many dollars for each unit? Oh, never mind.
That's not Randy's realm.
Just from kind of doing some analysis in the surrounding areas, what we think would be appropriate is somewhere in the 1,000 to 1,150 per month kind of spectrum. We'll probably be working with other people in the area to determine the final rent rates and everything like that. See what kind of interest we get as we do construction. If it gets to that point, do some pre-marketing and have some discussions with people that are interested and see what kind of market we're looking at. But from the general speaking, I think 2-bedroom, 2 baths on the main floor in the upper units. The lower levels are a little shorter front to back, so they're limited to 1 bath, 2 bedrooms. So the lower units might be in for desirability, a couple less front windows. They might be renting for just more closer to 1,000. We might be able to get a little bit more for the upper units as they're more desirable.
Okay. Any questions from the Planning Commission? Go ahead.
Randy, when you laid this out, the parking, you got it up against the right-of-way on 4 Mile. Had you looked at wrapping that around to the south to take a little bit of pavement out of that front yard area?
I did. The problem is there's a pretty steep slope there, and it would be greater than 6%. Sorry. If I wrap it around and pull it back, it would be really steep going down alongside. I looked at that coming down and then having access to the lower units from down below, but it got so steep that they'd end up in the detention pond in the winter.
Well, that may address why you didn't pull it around there, but in terms of how much pavement's out front, which is a function of the number of units that are planned on the site, and I believe there's a future street is planned immediately to the west of this. So that's going to be right on an intersection, and basically with this layout, that's going to be in what would otherwise be a clear vision area that I'm sure the road commission looks for at any intersection.
this would be pretty clear. I mean,
Well, you
just
got
a
parking
lot.
out into that area, and
Yeah, the grade is actually about 2 feet lower than, for the parking lot, about 2 feet lower than what's out there now. Plus there's pretty heavy trees right in that area, which will probably be cleared out, so it'll get
Yeah,
nothing but better. And right now, there's only a 33-foot right-of-way out there. We're planning to grant 50. So that's actually giving you a little bit more room for clear vision.
it just seems like, Dan, I didn't check myself, but is there a minimum parking setback off in the public right-of-way for this parking area? Or can they park right up to it?
There are some restrictions for adjacency to residential that we'll look at the final area site plan review. The exact numbers escape me right now, but I think the critical thing to your point is going to be the angle, basically a 45-degree angle at the intersection to keep that clear. And then you'd prefer to have some buffering and landscaping adjacent to parking areas by residential sites too.
One other item is there at that 50-foot mark, there's some boxes for either cable or telephone. So we're moving the sidewalk 6 foot toward Alpine. Still gives you a good parkway, but that will give you some extra room that's going to be open. The reason why we put the parking lot where we did is there's an existing 33-foot easement. So if you take that extra 17 feet, but we're going to be granting the 50-foot. So that was our rationale.
Other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we should open up the public hearing and hear what the neighbors have to say. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
Make that motion.
Motion by Steve. Is there support? Support by Elena. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Public hearing is open. Thanks for coming. A lot of what we look at as the planning commission is the master plan, what's planned to be there. This is actually master plan for medium density residential. That doesn't mean it's absolutely going to happen or not. A lot of how we go about our business here is we have specific rules we follow, and you know, if it fits and blah blah blah, all it down. We kind of stay out of the politics if we can. Like I like open spaces, you know. Well, okay, but there's a number of you here tonight. I'm sure most of you got the same thing to say. So if somebody wants to represent everybody, great. But you're welcome to come up and make a statement. There's times the planning commission will approve something and it will get to the city commission to be knocked down. That's putting us within our box of approval of if everything fits. But the city commission has the ultimate power to say yes or no. So if we do approve this tonight, please don't meet us in the parking lot to beat the tar out of us. So talk away. Please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Lou Van Leer. I live at 1173 English Ridge Drive. I believe I'd worked with Dan a little bit and had sent an email to Dan, and I believe Dan may have incorporated that into your packet for this evening's meal or meeting. When I looked at the plan, I guess I had a few thoughts. First, I was pleased to see that it was proposed to be developed as residential property as opposed to the existing office, research, parking, zoning. So I was pleased to see that. There were a couple of items that I was not happy with. One, and it's been discussed a little bit here already, the proposed density of the development is quite a bit higher than the density of the surrounding properties. Particularly it's when you look at the properties directly north across the street and the properties directly to the east are single-family residential properties with densities of 2 to 3 units per acre. It's been mentioned several times, I think, this evening. The property to the south, which is the English Ridge condominium, which is in the area in which I actually live, and English Hills condominiums, which is a little further south, are both in the area of 4 units per acre. So I feel the proposed density of this development at 7.4 units per acre is out of character with the immediately surrounding area. And I certainly would favor less dense development. My second concern was with regard to the site plan, and in particularly the layout of the parking area. It's been noted that as laid out, the parking area basically butts up against the proposed 50-foot right-of-way and basically occupies the entire front yard area of this lot. Again, given the residential character of the adjoining properties, I feel that this would be out of character again with the this nature of the other properties. I understand some of the difficulties involved in trying to find parking on this lot. It's been described as you get to the south on the lot, the topography is very tough to work with. If it turns out that there is not a feasible alternative to the parking lot as presented, I feel it would be appropriate that that some type of screening be provided between the sidewalk and the parking lot area to at least somewhat screen the parking area from the adjacent properties as well as traffic along 4 Mile. If that could be a vegetative hedgerow or some other type of screening, I don't know. That would probably be something more in your bailiwick as to what might be able to be done here. Another advantage I could see is if the density of the proposed development was reduced, is there would be some reduction in the traffic generated, although I don't think that would be dramatic. However, reducing the density would correspondingly reduce the amount of parking that's required and would allow perhaps a better layout, at least in my opinion, a better layout of the parking area to be presented. Appreciate the opportunity to present my comments and hope you folks have a good evening.
Sorry.
My name is Scott Baldwin. I live at 1122 4 Mile Road, just east of this proposed development. And I have several objections to this proposal. My first is that I feel it's out of character for the area. All the places in the surrounding area are single-family dwellings, and it should either stay that or I'm probably not too opposed to what it originally was set at. But I also have here a letter from my neighbor who couldn't be here today, and she expresses pretty much everything that I feel. I'd like to give this to whoever it should go to, and I'd also like to read it, if that's appropriate.
If you want to summarize it, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's short. I just
Okay.
as soon read it. My name is Teresa Hellis, and I live at 1130 4 Mile Road Northwest, Walker. I would like to object to this proposal rezoning and the preliminary site plan review for the multi-family residential project. My objections include the traffic congestion it would cause. It's out of character to the area, the loss of privacy, visual bulk of the buildings, the loss of vegetation, the overdevelopment, loss of property value, and loss of the view or outlook, and the increase in noise. Another thing that I would like to mention is in the discussion of this site, there was no mention of the creek that runs behind this site. They just call it a wetland. Well, it's more than a wetland. It's a free-flowing, year-long creek. And I don't see where putting a building of this sort in a parking lot would be beneficial to that creek, or creek, whichever you want to call it.
Okay, thank you. Others? Others?
My name's James Chassie, live at 1142 4 Mile. I think if anybody that this is going to affect, it's going to be me more than anybody because it's going right next to my house. I guess my concern is why not just a single family dwelling being put in here, which I wouldn't have an objection to. Maybe a condo, like a two-dwelling condo. But I'm worried about my privacy. This building is going up. It's looking right in my backyard. The parking lot, traffic at night, lights coming in. I got bedrooms on that side of my house. There's nothing there to protect me anymore. So I'm concerned that all my privacy, having my kids over, my grandkids in the backyard, everybody from these apartments looking right down on top of me, I will have to strongly say this is a bad idea for me and my family.
That's all. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Hannington. I live in the English Ridge condominiums at 1139 English Ridge Court. I have several objections to this property, but I also want to say I think it's very attractive from the front. I think it was very well done as far as the design. The parking, however, I feel like at this point I take my life in my hands when I'm driving down 4 Mile trying to turn left into the English Hills area. There is no light that turns left, and you cannot see the oncoming traffic from 4 Mile going towards Alpine. And so you have to wait until there is no turn, no cars turning, before you can even get into the condominium areas now. I can't even imagine what it will be like when you've increased the traffic, I don't know how many fold, in that area, the congestion, without increasing the road size, first of all, with the parking right on the road, would be impossible for the in and out of the condominium area. The second thing I wanted to ask about is something that perhaps I'm just naive, but I thought wetlands were for the protection of the area, for the actual wetlands. This is a deer crossing. There's beautiful deer that cross in that area where they're planning on building and destroying the properties. I'm also hoping that not only deer, but fox, rabbits, groundhogs. It is a true wetland. It is not just a field to be plowed and built upon. I'm also wondering, has there been a geologic study done? Because on our side of the condos, where we have the steep incline and the decline actually, and they're saying that their properties are going to be higher and very steep, the erosion factor is tremendous. Many of that area homes are actually at the precipice of the cliff now and wondering how to keep the erosion from happening. I think that needs to be studied before we have any other building that might have that same problem in the future. I also am naive in knowing what a catch basin is. Is that terminology for overflow water in a pond? What is a catch basin?
Scott?
Can anyone answer?
Yeah, if you can quickly, yes.
It's the hole that you see along the side of the street or in a parking lot where the water runs into an iron grate and it's collected in a storm sewer system.
So is it collected in the ground or is it collected in a pipe and then run off somewhere else?
It's collected in a round structure, big circular 4-foot diameter concrete structure. At the bottom of the structure there's a pipe that it would connect into, and we've got tens of thousands of them probably in the city.
Understand that then. Thank you for clarifying. I'm also concerned because that area floods anyway. That area across the from what is now the golf course area, which would be to the left across English Hills Drive, is a flooding area every time we get a major storm. It comes down through, but it feeds that beautiful creek that goes through the wetland, which is the home of all the animals that I stated earlier. It's a beautiful area, and to have that much taken, I'm just very upset about the fact that the wildlife is going to be disturbed. It's home to more than people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Others?
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come up and speak. My name is John Hodson. I live at 1131 4 Mile Road, almost directly across from the proposed plan. My major objection is the parking. I would have to see it every day. I sit in my front living room out of my great big picture window. It's not something I look forward to seeing. Secondly, is my concern for entering and exiting out of my own driveway with increased traffic. It is difficult enough with the speed at which most vehicles travel on the 4 mile. And the density, I believe, is a little too high for the area with respect to the surrounding lots. My last objection would be it's out of character, multi-family within single-family lots. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Others?
Hi, I'm Haley Jan. I live at 1300 4 Mile Road Northwest, which is directly west of the subject property, just across English Hills Drive. I have a lot of the same concerns that have already been expressed by the other residents. The only couple of points I had to add, one question/concern I had, you had mentioned that there would be the tree preservation on the south end of the subject property where the wetlands currently are. One question I had is what would happen to the trees and the vegetation that are currently along the west border of the subject property. As you go along English Hills Drive, there's trees both to the west and the east of English Hills Drive, and it sounds as if those trees would not be maintained, just in terms of maintaining vegetation and maintaining privacy. You know, even if there were just a row that continued along English Hills Drive up to the point at which, of course, visibility for the intersection would be an issue. That's just a question or a concern that I had. My other thought is, it sounds like from the conversation that these are designed to be purely rental units as opposed to condominiums for sale, something like that. My only concern with that is and again, I'm not too familiar with how this works, if there are restrictions on what type of rentals can be. I mean, could this be used for any sort of rentals? Would it be, you know, possibly subsidized housing, something like that in the future, where, you know, there may be other programs that come in? Just kind of curious about how it might change kind of the features of the neighborhood, depending on what the rental conditions were, if it's, you know, month to month more casual renters or long-term people who actually plan to stay there. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Others?
Hi. My name's Brian Richards. I live on English Hills Drive, 3435. Not all new, but I just kind of want to emphasize I'm majorly concerned with the density. I think if it's more lower density, it would fit more the character of the surrounding area, the neighborhood, especially when the neighbors are next to it and across and us from behind. The last lady mentioned on the west side of the building there, which I think I heard there's not currently an approved easement to connect the proposed ditch basin and 12-inch storm sewer that will go along the left side of the west side of the lot. It's outside of the lot, so I'm assuming that's where the easement's got to get approved. I don't think I heard that was approved yet, but that to me tells me that all that along there, there's some nice trees along there, are all going to have to be ripped out to put that ditch basin in. And I'm concerned about what's going to happen there in that corner. It's just going to open right up, and I'm just concerned that something, if this happens to go through, that we got to be concerned about the view and all that. Because right now that area is pretty much, you can't see into it from where we are. And if they're going to put a ditch basin in along there outside of the property line, I'm not sure what the requirements of there of to protect the view and as well as the property. But definitely concerned with the density, guys. It's just way too much for that area in terms of all the neighbors and the way that everything else is built. Also wanted to mention about, are there any requirements or restrictions you can put on so it doesn't become a subsidized housing project for future? Because I mean, right now they own it. I'm assuming the visitors will own it, but can they sell it right off, in the next year, and then who knows who's going to buy it? And are there any restrictions on that if it's sold and becomes a different type of a rental project? I've seen too many of these small little apartment kind of buildings around town that get to be looking pretty bad with cars parked in there that don't run anymore, and it just depends on how it's taken care of, and then that's going to happen here at the corner at the next owner, or if it's sold off as an investment. I'm not sure what restrictions you can put on it so that it maintains some kind of a level of rent to assure the conditions that are kept of the structure. So that's my only concern. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Others? Seeing that there is none, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Steve, is there support? Support by Elaine, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We can go down the rezoning checklist. Can the property be reasonably used under its present zoning classification? Yes, a number of uses permitted under ORP zoning could reasonably occupy the site. I think we can probably all agree to that one. Is the proposed use compatible with other zoning on land use areas? Yes, medium high density residential zoning is characteristic of the area south of 4 Mile Road and west of Alpine Avenue, M37, and acts as a transition between lower and density residential and agricultural land uses and commercial and office use on Alpine Avenue. Do we agree with that statement?
Yeah, in terms of, as one of the speakers pointed out, right now it's zoned ORP, which is non-residential. This would at least have a residential, be a residential development. The density, I think, is the X factor here, is whether or not it's a proper density to get the transition in that area.
Okay.
I guess my opinion, following up on what Terry said, is that when we talk about density, obviously it's units.
Buttons.
When we're talking about density, I think what everyone's concerned about is traffic count. And as Dan pointed out, in ORP, if this was a office building that could be built on here, that people tend to typically maximize the site, that the trip generation would actually be more, if not the same. So I think from a density standpoint, it meets the medium density, but as the folks, local people are talking about car count, the car count would actually be less, in my opinion, based on fact.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
I would agree with those comments that he just made.
Okay. Are the range of uses permitted in the proposed zoning district compatible with the area? Yes, so long as they are adequately designed to maintain safe and navigable circulation within, to and from the site, and blend with the site surroundings to the extent possible. I think it would probably fit better than ORP.
Mr. Chair, I just want to add something. This might be the best place to interject on the point I'm going to make, and I'm not sure if it's the best place, but I'll take a shot. So I heard a lot of people, including Commissioner Schweitzer, talk about the layout of the parking area. There are standards for that we want to drill down on if this goes into a final area site plan level of review. There are some setbacks to maintain consistency with adjacent residential uses we'll want to take a look at and drill down on the dimensions and numbers of that. And just another thing to keep in mind, and this is throwing a bit of a curveball, but that there is some flexibility with a PUD to have setbacks on buildings altered. I'm not sure if that would meet the intent of what the comments are here tonight, but that may allow you to move a portion of a building or a building a little farther up if you tuck some parking perhaps a little bit farther back. Not sure if that's practical on a site this small, but it is something to consider, that you can move the setbacks up a little bit closer to 4 Mile for the buildings themselves by moving the parking back. Just in the spirit of talking about circulation, adjacency with traffic and parking, we'll want to look at that more closely during FASP review. If not before then, if you otherwise don't prefer to table and get some more information on the plans before you act tonight.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
If I could follow up on that too, I guess, again, this is preliminary. I see about 10 feet between the building and the front sidewalk of these buildings, and probably 5 to 7 between the parking lot and the sidewalk. I think it would make more sense to have less at the sidewalk to building, have more at the side parking to sidewalk, therefore shielding with bushes where lights don't, as they pull into a parking space, don't shine right across the street. That's just design element.
Good point.
Comment. But.
Thank you. Our development trends in the area are consistent with the requested rezoning. Yes, there appears to be a demand for medium and high density housing. We will continue to explore this through the Walker 2040 master plan process. There is a demand for it, a lot of it. Is the proposed rezoning consistent with the 1998 City of Walker master plan? Yes, in terms of density. The language in the 1998 master plan describes a range of acceptable potential uses types, including lower density, multifamily developments. Does the proposed rezoning constitute spot rezoning? No, RPU.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm waiting for people to jump in.
Well, I'm looking at the future land use there, and I saw that earlier, and that is showing master plan commercial on that English Hills precise plat thing. So we're master planning commercial to the west. So
well, remember, that's a remnant from the Cabela's discussion.
Well, it's still in the master plan.
Yeah, there is some commercial planned, isn't there? Okay.
And that could possibly go to office park. I don't think it's going to be residential, but that's what the master plan process is for, to sort through that. So.
Does the proposed rezoning constitute spot rezoning? No RPUD zoning exists to the south of the site. Well, if you look at the map, here's my issue is if you look at the map, look at 3 sides of it are low density residential right now. So that's the biggest rub I have.
I think, yeah, just following up on that, I think Randy made a good point that this is on 4 Mile. You know, which I think changes the stance of what's going to be behind in a private road, tree-lined area. I mean, when it comes to uses and where you want to put what type of density and that type of thing.
Any other comments on that? What supply of land exists in the city for the proposed rezoning district. A significant area of land in Walker is zoned for single-family residential development. Okay, other questions or comments?
Taking into account just these points as you look at evaluating the rezoning request, I'm generally in support of the rezoning that's proposed. My misgivings are perhaps with the ultimate site plan in terms of whether or not you're going to get good separation, setback for the parking, location of parking on the property. So I'm not considering necessarily that 12-unit proposal to be, I don't know if that's ultimately going to be proper or acceptable, but I think the rezoning I think is acceptable. The ultimate site plan is where there may be some modification in my estimation.
I'd agree with you on that. I think I'm in exactly the same boat.
Yeah, I was going to say, Terry, you articulated it really well, and I'm inclined to agree with you there. To that point, I think it does merit further consideration with a final area site plan level of detail. So I don't know how others feel about that, but that's kind of where I stand.
Well, if you're talking about a future site plan and you're going to reduce the density, now that drops it from a 12-unit to a 9-unit or a 6-unit. I think that has a big bearing on the applicant's plans. So I would hate to have somebody go down the road here that's like, well, yeah, this rezoning's okay, but we're going to cut the density in half. Do we want to go all through that effort for the, you know? Think you got my point.
Well, I agree with you too, but going back to what Terry said, you know, the devil's in the details of the final area site plan.
Well, I think if we count it, looking at those details, it's what I've heard is the distance between the parking and the sidewalk, the green space. Mm-hmm. Terry's point on the corner clear vision. There is quite a bit of property from the drive that goes into English Hills. From this property line, that would be part of a 45-degree angled view. Now, whether or not there's a pullback on that left portion of the parking, because there is distance that could be pulled back to the south, and you have a little bit of a drive angle that comes in. But to me, I think I'm okay with the density, which refers to then how much parking we have to deal with. And the tweaking of the parking lot, I think, could change from what they've presented here at the final area site plan. In my opinion, as far as the pieces and parts to have to wait until the change in a final area site plan to make an approval for rezoning.
Yeah, to that, in response to what you said, I was going to say that I don't necessarily know that the 12 number is the issue, because I don't think that's the problem here. I think it's more structural with layout, and I think that the other thing is, privacy for the neighbors is important as well. If we can get some buffering on the eastern side to maybe cover that a little bit, because that, I can imagine that would be a very serious concern for myself if that were my home, having that kind of peering over myself. So I don't know what can be done with the structure of the layout, but that is something that is kind of concerning to me.
Yeah. The westerly building can't go any further south because there's a sanitary easement, so that's fixed. I don't think you gain anything by moving the easterly building south. That just gets the view into the neighbor to the east backyard more. That would rather be stated right where it's at.
I think this is a good discussion. I might just throw something on the screen and take it or leave it, but it's really just to continue the line of thought of kind of being able to be flexible on this parking layout, and kind of provoking the applicant to consider other layout types, and then depending on how comfortable you are with the direction of our different ideas we're talking about, if that's the level of site plan adjustment you want to see before you act on a rezoning decision, or if you think you're comfortable enough that the pieces can be moved around to make that rezoning decision, then come back with a final area site plan. But let me just throw something that's very crude on the screen and see if you can even understand it.
I can't read the document.
Yeah, let me zoom in.
Thanks, Tom.
Oh, I gotta be online here. I can't read that document.
So the idea would be, and I know I can't be heard by the YouTube right now, but single loaded parking adjacent to the buildings, you push them apart a little ways. Perhaps you get a small single loaded parking area between the buildings, and that pushes the parking both south and consolidates it inside of the site. Not sure how this would lay out in reality, given that it's not to scale and it's a very conceptual idea, but just another something to consider with the site redesign, where you put one row of parking in the front instead of two, and pushing that parking back a little ways.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Other questions, comments? Of course, I'd always like to see more detail before you go make a decision. I mean,
Well, I guess my comment is I have the same, I don't know, uncomfortableness that the density appears to be high compared to some of the adjacent, but by the same token, it's only 2 buildings. If this was 5, 6, 8 buildings at this density, I would say, whoa, whoa, whoa. But as Randy said, it's on 4 Mile. It's possibly can be on the precise plat road. It's going to be corner. I think Dan pointed out that the traffic generation is less than some of the other uses and densities that can be there. So I would agree that we can do lots of tweaking. Randy can do lots of drawing, sketching for plants and shrubs. But unless we're comfortable with the density as proposed, I don't think we should go down the rezoning route. I'm comfortable with it to go down the rezoning. So that's where I'm at.
Tim?
I'm good with the rezone.
Terry?
I mean, with the density.
Yeah.
On a process basis, is the rezoning tied to the site plan?
I think you should have a pretty good idea of how many units you're willing to accept before you go ahead with a recommendation for rezoning. And the general layout, there's probably some gray area to work with in terms of whether the parking lot has to be an L shape or a T shape. But there's shades of gray in there. You should be comfortable with the number of units you're willing to accept before you go into that final area site plan level of review. So another way to put that is if you're not quite comfortable based on the layout, you might see if they can make the layout better with the same density, and if not, dropping the density may be something that you need to try to figure out before you make a recommendation to rezone. That may be one way to do it, where you're sure you're not going back and fundamentally changing the project during the final area site plan stage.
Well, based upon your comments and the point that Tom just made, I'd be reluctant to vote in favor of the rezoning with this particular site plan at this time. I realize it's a preliminary area site plan, but I think it's critical in my mind to hold off on taking action on the rezoning with the site plan that we have right now.
Steve?
Yeah, but Terry, what's your concern? Is it the density, or is it how this is going to look landscape and aesthetic wise?
My concern is how it's going to lay out, and I'm not sure if all those things can be addressed. If it can be addressed with the existing 12 units, fine. If it can't, one way to reduce some of the parking there is to reduce the number of units.
Yep, I understand.
And that gives you more room to work with the site.
So are you leaning to table it and have some further discussion about?
That would, from my standpoint, yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Steve?
Right. I can be okay with the density of 12. I think that's the most that I could stomach. But I think that I think Tom made a really good point, and that's kind of the direction that my mind was headed with. The density is tough, but with it being only 2 buildings, it's not the same as if it were a large scale project with that same density level. So I could move forward with the rezoning tonight. You know, we do have the master plan to head it this direction, more this capacity, so that's where I'm at.
I'm okay with the density. I think we got a long ways to go in the final approval. You know, I think they have some work to do.
Elena?
I'm okay with the density, but were any of the different layouts tried during the designing phase?
Didn't know if you wanted me up here again, but yes. I had it where the 2 buildings were separated, and I had a T coming in between them with the parking lot. But with the walkout, I'd have to get that down so steep. I've got 8 feet of fall that I've got to make in 30, 40 feet. It just got too steep. I couldn't make it work. There are no windows facing the east out of that building. I did get that. That helps your comfort level. I can look at backing that parking lot up over on the west side, you know, kind of angle it down a little bit. I've got a little bit of room to work with. I'm not really getting into the really steep slope until, well, probably another 10 feet back, so I could bring that back a little ways. With the sidewalk being 6 foot off the right of way, I could put some trees and stuff in there too. So I mean, there's some things that are going to come up in the final area site plan, no doubt about it. You want me to address some of the other comments that we heard tonight, or not really?
I don't think we need
Okay.
Well, Randy's up there. You mind if I chime in with a thought that might help?
Go ahead.
If there's so much grade change, Randy, and you're, I saw this too and thought there could be a 5 or 10 foot adjustment for the parking to the south, especially on the west, but maybe even a little bit in front of the buildings. And if that's lower than the road, could you create almost a terraced situation there between the sidewalk and the front of those, so that the headlights and stuff would be down into a landscape wall, retaining wall, something like that, to kind of help buffer the
and then come up
visibility
to the
and the lights, things like that. It seems like that grade change could be used to your advantage there.
Mm-hmm. I think we are about 2 foot below 4 Mile right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, drop the parking lot a couple of 2-3 feet, so somebody pulls in, the headlights are at there, kind of sets it down. It's not up, it helps you lower the buildings. The buildings aren't so massive, so high.
Yeah, I guess my comment again is, if I'm comfortable with the density. We're talking about specifics. Randy's got the checklist and ideas. Tell them guys will make that work, and I think it's solvable in the final area, because it's fundamentally the same thing, just some tweaking of location of parking and landscaping would then be shown. That shows the screening concerning to the east and to the north, terrace type issues. So I'm comfortable with proceeding.
My opinion, I'd like to see more detail, but I think it's workable. So I would support rezoning. So I think we got everybody on the record now. So we either need to make a motion to approve, to deny, to table. First thing on the motion, Dan, you put RPUD 2 high density residential plan. Isn't that supposed to be medium density?
That's a really good question. So we only have 2 types of PUD, residential PUD rezoning, zoning districts allowed. There's no medium plan unit development for the residential categories. There's low, medium, and high for master planning, so the density targets that we need to stay under for master planning purposes. But within our zoning ordinance, there's only low density residential plan unit development and medium and high density. To give an example how this plays out is you can limit the density based on the project proposed so that you stay under that 8 units medium density floor. And an example of where there is a high density residential plan unit development is Bristol Ridge. It's a combination of very large single family lots and some condos. They needed I think the higher density zoning to allow some of the condos, but overall you have a medium or low density threshold. So long story short, there's only high and low for zoning. Master planning allows that middle ground, and if you stay under 8 units, you're in that middle ground.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Do we have to denote in the motion then that it's to stay below 8 units per acre?
Well, that's the PUD zoning is contract zoning that ties to the site plan. That's why it's so important to have the site plan details fairly well understood before you go into rezoning. So it is going to be tied to this site plan as proposed.
Got it. Okay. Well, then I can make a motion for case 18-822 to recommend approval to the Walker City Commission for the requested rezoning for the legal description provided below by applicant Steve Visser Builder LLC. Do I have to read the finer details, or can we?
No.
Got it. Yes. Based on the information provided by the applicant at plus or minus 1.6 acre legal plus or minus 1.6 acre legal description would be rezoned from ORP office research and parking to RPUD 2 high density residential plan unit development.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Tim. Questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries.
Okay. So then we are going to make the PASP motion as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll make a motion again for case 18-822 to approve the preliminary area site plan for the proposed 4 Mile Apartments project, which is dated 12/26/2018, subject to the following conditions and based on the findings of fact noted below. Conditions of preliminary area site plan approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 1/8/2019. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 1/8/2019. Findings on requested requested PUD benefits. No PUD benefits were requested. Well, I am.
Holy cow.
All right, findings of fact per the Walker rezoning checklist in section 94-2133G stated in the affirmative and based on the content of the 4 Mile Apartments preliminary area site plan dated 12/26/2018. The proposed development is compatible with the general character and intensity of the existing and potential development of the surrounding area because of the continued growth in the region and the fact that we've master planned it for medium density residential. The proposed development conforms to the City of Walker 1998 master plan, complements the City of Walker 2016 subplan number 1 future land use plan. Number 3, the development trends in the area are consistent with the requested zoning. This does not constitute spot zoning. The proposed use is compatible with other zoning and land uses in the area. The proposed development's density and building design will be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity. The proposed development is adequately served by highways, streets, police and fire protection, drainage courses, water and sanitary sewer facilities, and refuse disposal. The proposed development has adequate common open space which unites with the built portion of the site and the surrounding land. The proposed development has a layout which provides that adequate routes of traffic to, from, and within the site. The proposed development does provide convenient and safe pedestrian traffic routes. The proposed development does adequately address on-site parking. Noise, light, or other external effect from any source whatsoever which is connected with the proposed development will not adversely affect adjacent and neighboring land or uses. The PUD does not create excessive additional requirements at public cost or for public facilities and services.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Tim. Questions or comments?
Just a question. Is there some way to, in this motion?
Terry, sorry, interject if you could.
Is there some way in this motion for conditional approval of the preliminary area site plan to reference some of the commentary about adjustment in building and parking locations to better buffer the adjacent properties, consistent with tonight's discussion?
Do you want to make that a condition?
Correct.
I don't have an objection to that.
I'm good.
Yes. Do I have to then restate that fully, or
No,
can
you have
we
to read
just?
the whole
Condition
thing
number 3.
Oh, might as well start from the top.
That's condition number 3.
Okay. Make the edit.
Correct?
So noted.
I would also like to suggest a condition that add the conveyance of the additional 17-foot right-of-way, make that a condition of the site plan approval as well. Convey the additional 17 feet of right-of-way. They've indicated they will, but
That makes it easier for us road folks.
Okay.
So noted.
Any objection?
thank you, gentlemen.
Anything else?
No, that's it for me.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you for coming. Good luck, Randy. Case number 18-821, Walkerview Lot I-6, 1920 Northridge Drive Northwest, 3180 Walkerview Drive Northwest, Planned Unit Development, PUD Amendment, and Final Area Site Plan, Public Hearing. Applicant Pinnacle Construction Group, on behalf of owner RDG Walker LLC, has applied seeking a Final Area Site Plan approval to construct a 24,000 square foot industrial building and related site improvements on Lot I-6 of the Walkerview Industrial PUD project site, located at the current address of 1920 Northridge Drive Northwest and 3180 Walkerview Drive Northwest. These lots are zoned IPUD, Industrial Plan Unit Development. The request will also involve consideration of a preliminary area site plan amendment to the Walkerview PUD. Dan?
All right. Thanks, Tyler. This is a project, I guess, to summarize it, it's a technically detailed, fairly well-designed final area site plan for the site that's being proposed. But it also involves a scope that has expanded. So there's more to this particular project site than meets the eye, which is why at the end of our recommendations, you'll see that this is more of a recommendation for discussion and tabling, kind of what I'm calling a soft tabling, to allow some more details to be presented to you based on the relation of this site to the adjacent land configuration in the Walkerview project area. So that kind of frames up where I'm going with my recommendations, and I'll talk about why in my following slides. So here's the context of this site. There's a very large parent parcel that's now being subdivided on the east end of the Walkerview site, and adjacent to another fairly large parcel. These are two different owners, two different parcels, and it took a little while for us to really place this site within the broader development, and we realized that this overlaps both parcels, and it involves some planning and designing on steep grade and adjacent to utility easements in a way that affects all the properties around it. So there's multiple parcels that are really involved with this single lot proposal. Again, to give you a little more context, we're right across from the FedEx site where this will ultimately be proposed. This is a sort of a water course. I'm not sure if it's a tributary of the Indian Mill Creek or what water course that is, but area with steep grade dropping into that stream that you want to be mindful of how you design there. So right out of the gate, we want to point out that this is in the middle of the Walkerview project, and to identify the site. And here's the site as it lays out based on our most recent discussion. What you may have seen in your packet, or at least we at staff level saw with the first round of plans, was a site boundary that was a little bit different. It actually wrapped around the easement to the west. And so that's one of the changes I'll talk about. Again, the context of having steep topography, drainage near the subject lot. The easement that's shown there to the west is a regional detention stormwater easement. Jumping into the site plan, we have that was the green, yes, yep. So there's a regional detention basin. You can actually see, if I go back to these slides, that was built. This was a early 2018 aerial, so it was already built at that time. The building is going to be a 24,000 square foot building, 35 off-street parking spaces, stormwater improvements, connected to public utilities, and a pretty substantial landscaping plan with planters along the front of the building, some trees preserved in the back of the site, and a lot of shrubs proposed. Sidewalk along the entire frontage, as with all the other Walkerview sites. Here's an architectural rendering of the building, which meets the architectural standards in my opinion. We have a variety of architectural panels, different colors. They kind of took the approach of kind of announcing an entry inverted rather than having an entry that pops out like you see in some other buildings. But with the planters and landscaping, it kind of accentuates the building too. So favorable architecture from staff review standpoint. The proposed use, I'm speaking about that on this slide as well. There's going to be two parts suppliers, and the applicant can talk more about the business model. But really broadly summarizing that this includes making automation equipment, food and beverage display products, and a variety of other things that are shown on the site plan. So here's what came out during the site plan review process that really made us expand what we understood to be the review of this project. For one thing, the site really doesn't support the access easement that was designed into the overall Walkerview project initially. And when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to that red dashed line on the east end of the site. That lot behind this site, or to the south of this site, which has a large regional detention basin, was planned to have no formal frontage, but to have access via this 60-foot wide strip. And that was something we always knew about and kind of talked about earlier in the process, but now that the details are fleshing out, it turns out that 60-foot wide strip is not the most favorable place to provide access due to grading and complications with how the site would have to be designed. So additionally, there's kind of a flat area to the west of the site where there's a stormwater easement connecting to that pond. That's where they're proposing now to shift the shared access. And they're also proposing to shift the border of this lot so that it actually moves on the other side of that easement and contains itself to this site, and then functionally landlocks this site from providing access to I-5. It's instead going to be provided along the west edge. So there are some fundamental changes to the overall parcel fabric here that we discovered through this review process that I think warrant just a little bit more information in the way of a kind of draft easement that shows that those two functions can be combined in terms of stormwater and access, and a site plan that shows this shifted boundary, and also a little bit more design on the utility aspect to show that the utilities can be sort of designed across the front of the site and then tied into that access strip along the west end. And I think Scott's report has some more proficient comments relating to that. So here's the kind of a simpler view of where that shared access would be. I recommend we see a recorded easement, that we show how utilities utilize that easement, and some additional plan details. But all in all, this is on the site itself, there's a lot of good design work that's been done and receptiveness to staff's comments. I think there's just some fundamental issues of what we're actually looking at in terms of the overall Walkerview parcel fabric that make us have to sort of renotice this, cast a wider net, and talk about the broader project before we take action, as opposed to this originally being noticed just for the single site plan. So I don't have much else to say other than that we should probably have another meeting to take a final step of action on this site.
I'm still kind of remembering what took place on the north side of the street, just a little bit to the east, where started parceling it off and ended up having the detention pond by itself, nobody owning it, and the long-term maintenance of it as a question mark. Are we going down the same road with this layout right here?
I think that we're making the case that not necessarily. We're making the case that there can be this shared access easement along a flat strip that gets you there. And the design engineer can probably speak more thoroughly to that. But as opposed to the lot that we looked at a few months ago, this lot I-5 to the south still has some buildable area there. So you could have a building pad in front of the detention pond potentially.
Okay.
Other questions for Dan? Scott?
My first comment kind of addresses Terry's concern a little bit too. I think Dan covered this pretty well, but you know, the I-5 lot, when this development was visioned and proposed, we had quite a few arguments about, is that really a lot? Can you really get back there? You know, how can we make a lot that's that far back behind and landlocked? And we kind of agreed to disagree and just deal with it later, and now is later. So the way that they had laid that out would be to get access along the east side of lot I-5. That really is just too difficult. You know, like we thought before, it's just not going to be a good feasible solution. That's what they came in to see us with. And as we said, you know, hey, we got to pull Rockford into this because you're boxing them out. You know, you're giving them an easement, but there's a 10-foot drop off at the end of your parking lot. So there's no way that they can really use the easement. And I think that's where we started to all work together to say, what is the best solution here? And they had changed the potential west property line of this lot, as Dan showed, from the purple dashed line to the, I believe it was green, where it showed it kind of moving over. That gives them the opportunity then to put that access easement on the east side of the creek, but would still be on lot I-4. And I think, from my perspective, as long as Rockford agrees with that, you know, so that we're not hurting a property owner's ability to develop either I-4 or I-5, as long as they agree with it, I think that should probably be reasonable, because the access there truly is even a little bit better. And to help illustrate that, there's a storm sewer that was built there to go back to the pond, and you can see that on the aerial. We want to have access to that storm sewer so it's relatively flat over the top of it. That becomes then the basis for that access to the back, not only towards I-5, but to the detention pond. So we know that it's feasible. Now the other part of this is I-5 may never develop. So to get to Terry's point, we don't want to have a lot of dead frontage out there for I-5, because we get that, I think the term I used was should be carefully scrutinized so that we do not end up with the potential of an under-maintained frontage. And if it's all on lot I-4, then I-4 will be out there to take care of and mow the grass, to take care of the sidewalk. They will have a frontage that just extends in front of the valley or the creek. But it's not like we're asking somebody to come from off-site 10 miles away, take equipment off their truck and go take care of this lot that they're not actually occupying. So very long explanation of, I think, the PASP adjustment there. That kind of covers number 2. I think also, as we talked about the access. Number 3 deals with the proposed sign for the site. We didn't catch this during site plan review, but as we looked at it later and followed up with the design engineer for Walker View, there's a 10-foot private utility easement along the back of the public right-of-way. That's very common in industrial parks and plats and things. That's where the phone line goes, the cable line goes, the power, things like that. So we want to make sure that that's outside of that easement, another 10 feet back. On the site itself, detention or the drainage here is very delicate because it's got a lot of up and down to it. The plan calls for HMA rolled curb, and as you know, the curb is what kind of gathers the water, puts it in the catch basins, and then safely brings it to the bottom of these slopes into the ponds. And when we've got a 3-inch curb shown, oftentimes it's only built as maybe a 1-inch curb, or sometimes even less, because the contractor just doesn't adhere to those numbers quite as well on the field. So for something like this, we'd like to see either a traditional 6-inch curb so that we know the water can back up a little bit there before it washes out an entire slope. We've got a few sites around the city where we've watched this happen a couple of times, and it's pretty painful to see. So we would recommend at those catch basins it be 6 inches, and that the detail be clearly shown with a minimum of 3, so that if a contractor goes out there and paves it with only 1 or 2 inches, we can go back to them through the as-built process and say, that's not what you're supposed to do. You need a minimum of 3 to make sure that the water's contained there on the site. One of the more difficult things to explain, I might just walk up and point on the plan if I can. there's two sets of water and sewer services here, because there's gonna be two lots. There's I-4 and I-5. So you've got one set here that was intended to be in this cross-access easement that would come back to the back of the lot and then serve the property behind. And then you've got this set that would be intended for this building. Well, now that we're switching the access, potentially at least, over to this point, we want to swap these services out as well. So we'd want this service to be the one that comes to this building, and then these services would be stubbed out here into the easement and left so that if something does happen on I-5, they're there, they're available. There may be some issues with sewer. Some of you are probably thinking, boy, it's way downhill. How do you get that to work? There might be some issues there, but they could certainly, for one building, put in a force main system or a grinder pump and get up to that point. But the water lines too, if you have to travel that far, are a little bit difficult, but way more difficult if they're not there in the first place. So we want to make sure that they're there in the first place. So we propose that swap. And then our final comment is really just to make sure that those easements are in place before any permits are issued on the site. And if we're going to come back and visit this again, that gives us a chance to get that all knocked out.
Any questions for Scott? So Dan, how do you want us to proceed with this?
I'd like you to talk about it to the extent you're comfortable. I think the site plan generally is fair game. The layout is fair game. I think we just need to come back with a plan that shows that this is actually an amendment to the adjacent parcel fabric as well. It's a PUD amendment as well as a final area site plan review. So it just requires that we come back with a different notice. And I actually noticed it for February 6th or as soon thereafter. But we do need to just see some of those updates on the plan and sort of a draft easement that shows how they connect the access to that westerly line. So those would be my tabling recommendations: draft easement and minor revisions to the plan set.
Does the engineer or somebody want to make any comments on this regarding this?
Hi, I'm James Lewis, Pinnacle Construction Group. So I appreciate Dan letting us come up here today before we had everything worked out. Really what we're trying to get out of this meeting is the building itself and how it sits on the site, so that there's a long lead time in the building. We'd like to get it ordered, and if we get favorable comments from you, then we'd feel comfortable doing that in lieu of not having a full approval of the process, if that makes sense. I feel like we have a lot of time to work out the access easements, and there's some good plans put forward. So yeah, that's where we are.
Go
ahead. With the layout that you have and the lot configuration that you have, is there provision for building expansion on this property?
Yeah, we have envisioning that it's possible to build in the southwest corner of the not corner of the site, but off the southwest corner of the building. So.
Yeah.
So theoretically, put something else there, or build off of this like that. That's probably not in the 10-year.
Okay, but so there is some expansion capabilities with this layout.
Yeah, we're looking at how we sited it to that side and wanted to.
Okay, the next question, I don't know if that goes to them or who it goes to, but can we see a layout of how Lot 5 is the potential for a building placement on there in the future?
That would be wise.
Good evening, Jeff Edwards with RDG Walker. So I think, Scott made a good point earlier that, at this time, all we can do is kind of set up for the future, but we don't really know what the future holds for I-5. It may never be developed. We might get very fortunate and have someone come along that would like to build there. Obviously, that's our preference. But at this time, we've engaged with Morton Bruges Inc. to at least start drafting up and articulating what those easements look like, you know, what the resulting pad could look like. We haven't gone so far as to show, okay, we can put a, you know, 12,000 square foot building here or anything, but at least to understand, you know, if nothing else from a pro forma perspective, you know, what's actually left that's usable. So, you know, I think we would have some of that available at this next meeting, but we're just not at a point where we actually have a design ready for that. So,
well, at least if some type of a conceptual illustration of what that might, even identifying the buildable area on the remainder of, or what is identified as what, I-5?
Yeah, I think that little piece that's between what this future parcel will be and the pond, I believe Justin at Moore & Brugink has already more or less created a boundary around what's actually somewhat pad ready that we could build on. But as I said, we just haven't gotten as far as getting into engineered drawings and how everything connects and so forth.
Does that illustrate what's just pad ready, or just what could
just
be
what's usable, what would be buildable? So I think it represents a couple acres. So
Terry, my intuition on looking at that and working together as a group was that I-5 and I-4 might be good partners in the future, and maybe that line could be adjusted, and maybe the owners of I-4, you know, look to either acquire that for expansion in the future or to swap something out, because it really makes a whole lot of sense. The property line's not in the best spot.
Well, take it out a step further, if they picked up the northern part of I-5 and left the detention pond on their own again, we're back to what happened on the north side of Northridge.
Almost as bad, but we don't have the issue with the frontage, with the maintenance on the frontage, which is really, from a city standpoint, that's where all the complaints come from and all that stuff. But having a piece of dead property in the back, we still have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a maintenance agreement and set up that the pond will always be. Sure. Is it up to, it's up to the.
I believe that pond is in a public easement, and so we have an easement to get back to it over the storm sewer, and we will, we probably are, as of today even, responsible for keeping an eye on that and taking care of it. But that means much different thing from a drainage standpoint than from a property maintenance standpoint. We don't go back there and mow it and do those kinds of things. We go back and unplug pipes and keep it flowing. But there's not a regular maintenance crew that runs out and does a lot of stuff there because it's private property.
Well, my concern is that it becomes property, the development, fully developed, can't sell this, it goes for back taxes, and then you got a piece of property that nobody, quote, owns. They'll own, somebody else, the government takes it or whatever, but.
Even if that happened, the city would end up owning it, and the city would have easement to it.
No.
That's what we got to ensure, is that the city.
If it goes for back taxes, it goes to the county.
The exact same situation happened in North Wilson Commerce Park. And
well, then after it goes to the county and the county doesn't want it, then it goes to the state.
Holy smokes.
So in North Wilson Commerce Park, we have the exact same situation, and we've acquired a piece of property that's back there that nobody wanted. It was left over. It contained a lot of the detention and kind of the wetland, lowland properties, and there's not much to do with it, but the city acquired that 10, 15 years ago because it was better for us to have it than somebody else that didn't want to do anything with it. So we could end up in that same boat again.
Just as long as we're aware that could happen.
Yeah, okay, we're they were asking about, you know, are we okay with the layout in the building and everything? And as far as what I can see from Dan's recommendations and even Scott's, the building layout, the parking lot, the detention and everything seems to be within what we would consider done well. Am I correct in that?
I would have one comment. Did we run the truck turning templates to get them into that dock?
We asked for truck turning templates and they showed us getting out, but they've got enough space there. In my humble opinion.
Are we sure though? Because I wouldn't want to pull in there and back in.
That's funny. So, I actually thought that too. It's like, well, they're leaving, but.
Sometimes we feel like we're being awful picky with those kinds of things. So when they showed the truck turning template for getting out, I kind of let that go.
except for when they use that little area back there to pile up shipping containers and dumps in and all the crap that generates outside the building, and the poor guy comes in there and it's like, how am I supposed to back into this deck?
And we have that on almost every industrial site in the city.
Doesn't mean we should not overlook it, or we should overlook it.
Well, let's handle one piece of business. Why don't we open the public hearing? Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Steve, is there support?
Support.
Support by Elena, all in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, the public hearing is open. If you have anything you would like to state regarding this case, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. As I see there is none, please, I would entertain a motion to close.
Motion to close.
Motion by Steve, is there support?
Support.
Support by Elena, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, any other comments on the final area site plan layout? So Dan, all we're gonna do is table this, correct?
That's what I would recommend. What I would recommend is because you have to come back with some comments and action on the amendment to the parcel fabric adjacent, you can take action on that as well as this site plan at the same time. So
okay,
that would be my recommendation.
Other comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to table according to citing Dan's. Oh, wow.
Moved.
Tom made a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Terry. Questions or comments? Comments by the developers? Everybody understand what we're looking for?
I just have one last comment. Just doing some quick math. When Justin looks at your site, he's got about 10 foot lower than what the southerly outlet catch basin maybe for is the sanitary that you'd be tapping into. That site pad that we're looking at is probably 10 feet lower than that outlet, so you can't flow backwards. You'll have to grind it, I'm guessing.
Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's tabled. Thank you.
I do send Dan pictures of the truck. I've been told, oh no, they don't have to be there. Oh, I got the last
You do. I don't know if I should tell you this, but the reason I asked for the turning template was to show they needed all that pavement to save some trees. So that's another angle, just so you know, it could be worse.
What could be worse?
So I made them show the turning template to show that they needed all that paving, as in I didn't think they did need all that paving at first. So
Dan, yeah, you need to come riding in my truck and I'll let you drive.
I think we warned them that there was a gentleman named Tom Bile on the planning commission and that he would ask about the truck turning template. So we'll again warn them to make sure that it's an entering and an exiting template.
I didn't disappoint them.
You did not disappoint us.
Okay, Dan, you had a couple slides.
Yeah. Normally I just kick this off as a item that's just housekeeping at the beginning of every year, at the end of our first meeting. Something we do is elect commissioners, but I guess I'll just throw this up. This is actually I think from the bylaws of the Ottawa County Planning Commission, so it's not exactly from our bylaw language, but it gives a pretty good sense of what we ask our elected officials on the Planning Commission do. This is what we call the officer positions on the Planning Commission. So we have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. So I guess if you want to just consider the roles of these, the duties of these three roles, the chair presides at the meetings, manages remarks and procedures, restates motions, reviews items on the agenda with staff as necessary, and acts as sort of a spokesperson and representative of the PC. And the vice chair would, of course, come in and fill those shoes when the chair is out. The secretary is going to be the kind of record keeper, and I help with this, but the person who signs off on the minutes will make sure that everything's being documented correctly and checks minutes before each meeting, and sometimes receives communications. That's usually me in the city of Walker, but just so you kind of have a guideline of what we're looking for in our different elected officials. So with that as kind of a guiding slide, I invite you to make your elections. This is a process you initiate at the beginning of each year, and I guess you can go ahead and take it from there.
Well, I'm going to speak up right away. I am stepping down as a chair. I am burned out. I've found myself dreading meetings, and if I'm dreading these meetings, I mean, the money doesn't make up for it. I know the money's great, but I've been a very involved chair. I go to a lot of meetings with those two guys. We often, when there's controversial stuff, we'll meet the day prior to these meetings. I go to a lot of other meetings just out of curiosity too. I'm burned out. I need to step back from the center chair. I do the vice chair, I do the secretary, or I just do planning commissioner, but I will not be the chair. I know that somebody is interested. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say we joked a year or two ago about alternating, and so if you would be interested in coming back after a break.
I'd be interested in coming back after a break of a year or two. That's fine, but it doesn't need to be a lifetime appointment.
No, I understand that. So, I mean, I would be willing to do I don't want to be the chairman for years and years and years either, so.
Well, Terry actually was interested in doing it.
Well, then have at
it. I second it.
Terry, is that okay?
I'd be willing to try, because going through these meetings, I have a great deal of respect to how you handle it and what it takes to
it's tiring. It is. And as busy as we've been, I mean, come on, when you're having 3 or 4 cases a night, it just gets old. And,
understand. Don't
so
apologize for it.
I nominate him for chair.
I think we've elected him already.
Okay. Vice chair.
If he accepts.
I would try it for a year and see where we go.
Vice chair?
I have no ego that I have to be the vice chair either, so I'm very content to sit over here in the corner. So,
well, last time Jason wasn't here, we appointed him to something.
What's that?
Well, I don't think I'd appoint vice chair to somebody that's not here.
No. We did secretary last year to Jason.
We'll do that again right now. Here, I nominate Jason for secretary.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
And if you're willing to be as vice chair, that would.
As long as you don't miss any.
I'm going to miss one in early March.
Okay, I would do vice chair.
So support.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Suckers.
I was going to say we better not talk Terry out of it.
Anything else, Dan?
Well, two other things I just want to reiterate, or kind of reflect what you said, Tyler. This has been a really busy time, kind of for me, because I came on board right around the time you were appointed to the chair position, and it's kind of validating to me because a lot of it feels like learning curve, but I also think we are a very growing and very busy city. So I appreciate all that you all do every other Wednesday, and I know I've made you go through the ringer on some 3-hour meetings a couple times a year now. So we'll try to manage our caseload and bring projects to you when they're ready. But I appreciate what you do when you go through the meetings with friction. So I think we appreciate all your expertise. From everybody here has a lot of diverse background and good opinions to share. So thanks for that. And then the last thing I was going to say, if you want to grow your expertise, there's some training opportunities that I wanted to make you aware of. So just sharing this time of year, these things kind of streamlined because we have Ottawa County offering these free planning and zoning workshops. So feel free to let us know if you want to attend any of these. Well, it's actually this is the only workshop that Ottawa County is holding this time around. So it's planning and zoning fundamentals. I've done their zoning board of appeals training, and it was very productive and very helpful. Michigan Association of Planning also has a series of workshops that are also very informative. So feel free to let us know if you're interested in any of this stuff. We'll keep circulating the information.
Okay, any other comments or questions, or otherwise I'll entertain a motion to.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Hey, there.